call the meeting to order. This is the budget workshop for the Human and Community Services Committee for March 13th, 2023. And recognize that Counselor Deputy Mayor Sweeney is on with us as well. And I think we'll have additional counselors joining us in the next couple of minutes, but I think we have a lot to go through. So let's turn it over to Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And what we're going to talk about this evening.
Absolutely. Good evening. Good to see everyone. We're pleased to welcome you to our first budget workshop following last week's budget presentation. This evening, we have Laura Ermsher, our Library Director, and Helen Rubino-Turco, our Director of Leisure and Social Services, on hand to present their respective budgets. We also have Peter Privatera, Patty Lewis, and Lisa Newton from our Finance Department as well to assist with any questions that folks may have. And I will turn things over to Laura to, why don't we start with Library? And Laura will give us an overview of her budget. I think Peter and Patty and Lisa, I think Laura did win our budget award, didn't she, for coming in with probably the most straightforward budget of any of our directors. So Laura, through you, Madam Chair, we'll turn it over to Laura to give a overview and hitting some of the highlights of the library budget.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Town Manager. I'm so pleased to be here with you tonight. And this is also marks my first year in this position as Director of the West Hartford Public Library. And I was just remembering last year, I came in about, I think, 3 days after we submitted our budget. So I am reasonably confident. I know a little bit more about what I'm talking about this time around. And I wanted to just mention how wonderful it's been in my first year. I've really enjoyed seeing how much the community loves its library and the vital role that we play in connecting people with what they need. And we assist people every day with technology assistance, reading recommendations, factual information, navigating resources, and gathering together as a community. And we have a few, well, we have many accomplishments from this year, but I just wanted to mention a few of them before we get started. We spent the past year focusing on reopening and recovery from the pandemic. We've restored our hours in-person services. And in the last year, we welcomed over 185,000 visitors to our 3 library locations. And we've loaned over 500,000 items from our collections in our libraries and online. This year, we had the pleasure of working with our town colleagues and Tecton architects to develop the feasibility study for the new community center and library. It was wonderful to get to know the community through this process, to understand their needs, and to see how the library can really fit with the other town services to deliver a facility and a program that is going to help them well into the future. And at our Noah Webster Library, we opened Studio 20 South this year, which is our digital maker space. And it's been really wonderful to see the creativity and excitement from our users, and to have to give the community a space to create and learn on so many different things. And it's really the only place in the area they can do all of this for free. And so it's a wonderful resource, and we're excited to see much more coming out of there this year. And so it's been a great year, and I'm looking forward to building on our success. Looking at our budget for the fiscal year 24, our proposed budget is a little over $3.5 million, which is a 0.8% increase from last year. And this increase is mostly from wages and salaries that are due to go up for merit and minimum wage increases. Our operating expenses remain level from fiscal year 23. And like everyone else, we've seen costs increase. Our collection budget has been level, and our IT and supply costs have gone up. But we also looked really carefully at our needs and our priorities for the coming year and understanding the landscape we're all in. We were able to find some cost savings in some of our underutilized budgets. And it was really important to me to keep our operating expenses level because there's 2 significant areas that we have in this budget that I believe are critical for our success, which is funding of our vacant position and going fine-free. The vacant position is it's a librarian 2 position, and it's been unfunded for a few years. And in this budget, it'll be funded through the American Rescue Plan Act. You may recall Town Manager Ledwith mentioned in his budget presentation last week that a few positions are to be funded through ARPA this year with the intention of moving them to the general fund next year. And so a little bit about this position and why it's so critical for us. It's the program's publicity and outreach librarian. This position is responsible for coordinating all of our public programs and overseeing the team that does publicity and outreach for the library. During the pandemic, when library hours and services were greatly reduced, other staff pitched in to fill this gap and were able to make do temporarily. And if you're familiar with the library at all, you know that we didn't stop programs. We have stuff going on here every day. And so we still have staff that are doing this work, but it's really difficult for them to not have someone coordinating everything. There's gaps in what we do. We see what we're missing. We know we can do better. And that's why it's so important for us to have someone in this position. It's critical for us for advancing our diversity, equity, and inclusivity efforts. We strive to offer programs that serve the different needs of the diverse West Hartford community. One of the main duties of this position is to ensure we offer a balance of programs that appeal to all different segments of the community. Without this position, staff in other departments are taking on more programming responsibilities, and while they're focused in their area of expertise, they're leaving gaps in program content. And we're missing that organization-wide coordination to make sure we're reaching our entire community. Outreach is another significant component of this position. The library has so many varied offerings. It can be really challenging to get the word out and let residents know all the services and programs that we have available to them. We need this position to do targeted outreach to our residents and connect them with the library services that meet their specific needs. And this position is an important contributor to overall library operations. Without someone in this role, other staff are covering program and outreach duties in addition to their regular work. This causes an additional strain when we have unexpected absences, and staff are stretched thin to cover shifts, and it's starting to affect morale. Our other main priority for this year is our fine-free proposal. So in fiscal year 24, I'm proposing that the library goes fine-free in order to fulfill the library's mission and support the town's efforts to provide equitable services to all residents. Going fine-free means the library will no longer collect overdue fines on books and other materials returned after their due date. The primary reason for this change is to reduce barriers to library services, particularly for low-income residents, children, and families. Fines can discourage patrons from borrowing materials or using the library entirely, and that's impacting those who could really benefit the most from the library's resources. The overall budget impact is very small. Fines represented only 0.63% of the library's budget last year. We will still charge a replacement fee if an item is never returned to the library, making sure that we're not seeing any holes in our collection. And when an item is overdue for 30 days, that's when it goes into a lost or kind of an billed status. And so a patron would be billed for the replacement. If they return it, then that fine is wiped away. But if they don't, then they would have to pay for the replacement of the item. And many libraries across the country have already gone fine-free, and they've seen many benefits. They've seen an increase in materials returned because people are coming back to the library. They've seen an increase in library card registrations, and they've seen an increase in the number of students using the library for homework. This is a local and a national trend. Over 110 libraries in Connecticut have gone fine-free, and in our consortium, 23 of the 33 libraries are fine-free. If we were able to do this, another benefit is that it would take away some of the difficult customer service interactions that we're having now. People are asking us every day, why are we charging fines when other libraries around us are not? Going fine-free will allow us to uphold our mission and serve all of our patrons, regardless of their ability to pay fines. And so in the budget, the fine-free proposals reflected in the revenue portion. We've estimated that we'll collect about $3,000 in replacement fees, and that amount comes from looking at the past several years. About 15 to 20% of all of the fees we collect have been replacements. So that's an estimate of what we think we would see. And the amount of fines we collect has been kind of difficult for us to estimate. With limited services during the pandemic, we suspended fines for a while. And we've also seen and heard from some of our patrons that they're going to other libraries because they're fine-free and they don't want to check out things here and risk getting a fine. So those are our main priorities. I did want to address a few of the changes that you saw in different divisions in the budget, and then I'd love to take questions if you have any. So I mentioned that we kept our overall budget level, but we made changes within the different divisions. And so one of the changes that you probably saw was in the temporary payroll. So we have about 70 part-time staff that cover every department in the library. And when we opened Studio 20 South, we readjusted all of our departments in order to staff that area. So we cut some in the branches and adult and all over. So you'll see some decrease and they're in the IT budget. So that's the changes in the temporary payroll. We also made adjustments in the library materials line. This is our collection budget. The overall budget's level funded, but we made adjustments for changing usage. We're seeing declines in DVDs and CDs, so we moved some of that to other areas that we want to grow more. And we also moved some money over to increase our program and supply lines that support our public programs. And in particular in teens, we've seen a huge growth in that area. And we also identified funding to support the Mayor's Youth Council. That's been a tremendous program that didn't have a budget set aside for it. So we now have moved things around so that that program can have a budget to support all the work they're doing. And then the last thing I want to cover is towards the end of our budget package, which is the West Hartford Library Fund. And so this fund is currently a combination of a few different revenue and expenditures. So we get a state grant for loaning materials to other libraries. It was about $6,500 last year. We also have copiers, and so we charge patrons for the cost of copies. So we get revenue from the patrons paying to use those, and then we have the expense of running the copiers. And then there's other grants and donations. Last year, we got we had ARPA funding for a study pod that I think was nearly $30,000. So if we get an outside revenue source, it goes in here. And so what we're proposing this year is to separate out the copy portion of this budget, because what's been happening is if the increases to running the copy program, that is being offset by the grants that we receive. So we want to separate those funds, and the copier is really more of an operational expense. It should be part of our supplies, and the revenue we take in is supposed to offset it, but if it's a little imbalanced, it shouldn't be affecting the grants that we receive. So that's my overview. Happy to answer any questions that I can or give you any more information.
Thank you so much. And before we go to questions, I just want to recognize that we've been joined by Councilor McGinnis, Councilor Cortez, and Councilor Fay. Thank you so much for joining. And members of the committee have questions? So Deputy Mayor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, Laura, for this great presentation. I'm excited about the move to fine free. Could you just do us a favor? Can you send us an email with those 23 or 33 communities, and then the 110 libraries that you mentioned that are also fine free, and if they have any other compelling information on how their revenues have changed or their participation has changed. Maybe not revenue is not a good term here, but how their usership has gone up.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Be encouraged. Don't need that now right now, but would love to have that information. Other than that, understand your need for someone else there. And in regards to the number that you stated of folks that visited the library, do you know where that is from last year?
Yes, if you'll just let me get to the right page.
And maybe last year may not be the best number, but like 2019 numbers.
So these are all fiscal year numbers. So fiscal year 2020 was just under 300,000. 21 was 56,000, and then last year was 185,000. And so that goes through July of 2022, and we're already seeing every month we're higher than we were last year. So I'm anticipating this current year to be higher still.
So we're still have ways to go to catch back up.
Yeah.
Okay. And is there anything else that you think that we can do on the funding level to make sure that we do get to back to 300K? Because that seems like a pretty awesome number. And I don't know where would that be comparably across the state?
I'd have to look at other libraries across the state. I don't have that with me. I think that one of the challenges we've seen is that people stopped getting used to coming to the library during the pandemic. And so some people are still kind of surprised when they come in, like, oh, I forgot you're here, or I forgot you have this. So we're looking at a lot more outreach opportunities, and not to harp on it, but that's another reason why this position is so important, because I think a lot of it is really telling our story and letting people know all the different things that we have. A lot of people still associate library with books or with kids. That's where they bring them in. And we're working really hard to let people know that we have something for everyone. And they may not realize that you can come here and get technology assistance. You can get your documents notarized. You can do so much here. So we're trying to figure out how to spread the word more to get people in.
And then I just have one question. Where would like the audio and video book subscription fall underneath in your budget, and how do you see that impacting your budget going forward? That's been a pretty well publicized issue that's going on.
Yeah, so that's in our collection budget, and that is an area that has been flat for several years. We have been increasing our ebook and e-audiobook budgets. Some of it is upset because we've seen a huge decline in demand for DVDs and Blu-rays with so much streaming. So we're able to shift some kind of lessening technologies, shift the money from that to other resources. But it is impossible to keep up with the demand for that. We have very long wait lists. We have titles that we're not able to buy. We can't replicate the print collection that we have in digital because the cost is too high. The cost for ebooks is much higher than the print book because of publisher restrictions on licenses and how they sell to libraries. So we can buy a lot less for the money that we have. So it's very challenging to keep up with demand, and also to explain to people why we can't get an ebook the same way we can a physical book. I think looking ahead, that's an area that we will need to grow. We'll need to address our collection budget because it's been flat for so long, but we've been able to move things around and allocate the funding where the highest demand is.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Cortez, do you have any questions?
No questions, just a comment, of how we learned during this pandemic what an important role the library is, and how essential it is to our community. So the question is, how do we let the community know that we are more than just a library, right? But I applaud you and all your efforts, Laura, and trying to let her, keeping in mind that there's some outreach that needs to be done, that we're bigger than just what a library used to be. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll also recognize that we've been joined by Councilor Zdanowicz. Thank you for joining. Do other members of the council have questions? I have a couple of questions. So thank you very much for the explanation. Can you tell me, maybe I just didn't see this, how much is the position that's going to be ARPA funded in fiscal 24? What's the cost of that position?
I think it's around 82,000 plus benefits.
I can find that in 1 sec.
Yeah, me
Okay.
too.
Thank you.
Right. I know that number.
Then while they're looking, I guess. So I don't mean to belabor it, but can you just help me understand once again the fund? The library fund?
Um,
Sorry.
I have been working to understand it for a while. So, there, as I understand it, kind of the history of it is when the library had kind of different funding sources, they were commingled into one fund. So we have our regular budget that has all of these different budget lines, but then we get money from other sources. And so the library fund represents all of those other sources. So we get, part of it is our state grant. There's a program where through the state, if you loan books to other libraries, you get kind of a stipend to offset that cost. And so we get money from the state every year based on how many books we loan to other libraries. That's the state grant portion of it. The other portion is our copy fund program. So we have copiers that people can print or copy in the building. And we charge a very small rate for people to use that. And the charge is really mostly so people don't operate their business out of the library. It's 10 cents a page. It does not sustain the cost of the toner and the machines. So we charge people to use that. So we get revenue from their use of it. But then we also have a cost because we pay the toner, we pay for the equipment. So it's the money coming in and out for related to the copies. And then we have occasional grants that, like we got an ARPA grant, ARPA funds last year to install a study pod in our main library. And that was about $30,000. So that's not a recurring thing, but that's a place to put the money when we have it from a different revenue source. And so the library fund has been the source where all of these things go together. And then when we spend out of this fund, but it's been commingled, so it's difficult to track. Like if we have a copy cost, it could come out of our state grant money because it's all going in the same place. So our hope this year is to separate out some of the more routine operational things like the copier costs, because that's just one of the things we have of doing the business of the library. If we pull that out of the fund, then the library fund remains just this kind of external funding from the state to do the state program. If there's an external grant, it goes in with a specific purpose. Does that help?
Yes, that does help. So as far as the expenses for, is it called Deliver IT? It's interlibrary loan, right?
It's either
Essentially.
deliver it or borrow it. It's, or maybe both programs. The state has a bunch of programs that all end in it. And so, yes.
But essentially, we're talking about interlibrary loan. Like I go online, I try to get a book, West Hartford doesn't have it. You say, okay, we can get it for you from Southington. And it eventually shows up usually pretty quickly, actually. So all the libraries are getting grants to participate in that program. And then what are the expenses involved in that program? Sending, like, do you mail the book out to the other library or drive it over? Or is that what the expenses are?
No, so the money from the state can actually be used for general library purposes. So it's not earmarked just to support the books going out. It's more of an incentive program to say you should participate in this, and the state has some funding to kind of reimburse the libraries because their collection is supporting people beyond their own specific town or community. So we can use the state funding for, and we report to the state on how we use it, but we can use it for general library purposes. But we have to report to them how we're using it. It can't be part of our municipal funds. We can't say we have this, so therefore we don't need municipal funds for it. We can't replace it with that.
Okay, so I think I'm almost there. So my only remaining question is, what do we use it for? Like, what are some examples of expenses we
Yeah.
have out of the library fund
So
that
we
are not
actually,
fixing the copiers?
yeah, we haven't used it in a few years because the staff before me were holding it until there was a permanent director in place. But one of the things that we're using this year is to reconfigure our main library holds and new book area. So we are getting new shelving and tables. So there's like a furniture line in our state budget. And so we're kind of redesigning the space to make it a more kind of welcoming and a place you want to spend some time and read, and less of a transactional, you like go down this corridor to pick up a book. So it's the furniture and it's the design, because it's a custom unit to fit in our space. So that's an example of how we're using it this year.
All right, I get it now. Thank you. Those are all my questions. Welcome to Counselor Blanks for joining us. Do any other council members have questions about the library services? Yes, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to answer your question on the salary for the unfunded Library 2 position, it's $84,000.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just to keep in mind for next year.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the good work you're doing. And I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will now turn to our Department of Leisure and Social Services, and we have our Director, Helen Rubino Turco. As folks who've been on the council know, and for our new counselors, this one's a little bit more complicated than the average budget. So we have general fund, a leisure services fund, a community development block grant fund, and then we have the Westmore Park Fund. So through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to our director, who will provide a summary of her overall budget. Thank you.
Welcome, Helen.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Town Council and staff. As the town manager said, we have 4 funds to discuss tonight, plus the capital budget. And what you'll see in the overall budget is that really we're returning to pre-pandemic programming in staffing and costs, as well as revenue. So we continue to have very strong interest in our camps, both some which operate in the general fund, some which operate in the enterprise or the leisure services fund. And so we'll be discussing all of those factors as those facets as we go through. So if we start with our general fund on page 13-3, you'll see an overview here. We did add a position last year. That is the Assistant Director of Social Services. So you'll see that we went from 26 full-time to 27 full-time last year, and we're maintaining that number going forward. That number does not include the police liaison social worker, whose position you'll find in the police department's budget. And if we dig a little bit deeper on page 13-4, this is where you see the management of basically the leisure services fund. I'm sorry, the leisure services department. So this is the management side of the department. We have an account that covers administration in both the leisure services fund and in the general fund. And this is where you find the general fund portion of leisure services. And here again, you'll see the one thing that jumps out is the advertising cost. So what we've done here is we've moved the program costs, for the printing costs, the development costs of our leisure services program guide, which we had parsed out to various departments. And that took actually a fair amount of administrative time to unspool the invoice and then parse it out to the various departments. So we just decided to put it all in one place. So you'll see a corresponding decrease in advertising in some of our facility budgets. Otherwise, what you see here is really a return to normal. As I said, the dues and travels up a bit because we are now going back to attending some of the training sessions in person or the annual conferences. We do have a somewhat of an increase in our the cost of our graphic designer, but this is due to the fact that we have the program guides as well as some of our quick at a glance that we insert kind of quickly just at the beginning of the summer. Like, this is what we have left. It just gives one more boost for advertising. In the past, we printed and mailed to 36,000 households the program guide. So we printed about 30,000 of them. We had them mailed, so we had printing costs, mailing costs, as well as the design costs. And we have shrunk that down, so we only print a fraction of that. In fact, about 2,500 instead of 25,000. We still have them available at the libraries, at all of our facilities, and we also have them available at Town Hall if people want to take them home. So they're available, but we have found that people really use the online version, and you can page through it on our system. We are able to recoup, to save that money from the printing and the mailing. So it's really been a sea change of the way we do business. One of the things we also notice is that people do like to have a deadline. So a few years ago, we started opening registration for our programs on a certain day at a certain time. And we've settled on February 1st at noon. We found that if we did it on a weekend, or if we did it in the evening, or if we did it at midnight, we wouldn't have staff here to answer the phone, and it rings off the hook with people either having a problem getting on, or I can't remember my password or something. So it's very helpful to have staff at all of our facilities that are all answering the phones in those 2 hours leading up to noon, and then for the rest of that afternoon. So those are just one shift in the way we've kind of done business over the last couple of years. And then moving on, the next section is the case management division. And this is really the administration and the work of the social services department. The large portion of the social services department. And so here you'll see the assistant director position has gone from being 50% funded to 100% funded. Last year, as you may remember, it was half funded by ARPA and half by the general fund. And here you also see one interesting thing to note is under contractual services on 13-6, you'll notice there's 23,000 in the current year and 15,000 in the next year. That 23,000 was an unusual one-time only pass-through grant to the bridge. And so we wouldn't see that repeated. But what we do have, there are some funds in the next year's budget to really spend some time doing some strategic planning. This department now has an assistant director who can help us lead that process of really reviewing our practices across the lifespan of our community, particularly the youth operations. We are looking at what the long-term impact of COVID is, and where's the funding going to be to help support those youth. And this is from kindergarten on through as they get older. So we really wanted to spend some time to look at, are we doing things the best possible way, and anticipating what our needs will be in the future. You also see kind of an increase in the vehicle expenses. This is largely the police liaison social worker uses a leisure services car. And so this is where the funding comes from it. At some point in the future, we're hoping that it'll switch to, as she becomes more of an embedded social worker, that expense would be taken up by the police department, and we would be able to return this car to more general use for the other social workers, because they have to go to evictions or they might have to transport a client and they need a town car in order to do that. Are there any questions so far?
I don't have any questions. Do other counselors have questions so far? Counselor Blanks?
Thank you, Counselor Poland, and I apologize for my tardiness joining the meeting. Helen, thank you for your report out thus far. Can I go back to page 13.4? And this was just a question that I had when I was looking it over in terms of the full-time position schedule being 0.85 for the director and so forth and so on. My question is this the amount of funding that's being provided, and where is the remaining funding coming from, if I'm reading this correctly?
I'd be happy to answer that question. Thank you, Mrs. Blanks. So a portion of the director's salary, some of it goes into the Leisure Services Fund and some of it is from CDBG. So about 5% of my time is spent overseeing the CDBG program. Actually more of my time, but that's the amount of my budget, of my salary that's budgeted there. And then a portion of my salary is budgeted in the Leisure Services Fund. The same thing goes for the manager, for example. The Leisure Services Manager is half funded in the general fund and half funded in the enterprise, the Leisure Services Fund. The recreation specialist is half funded. She's all in the general fund, but half of her time is coded to Elmwood Community Center. So she works on programming at the Elmwood Community Center, but she also facilitates the program guide, which affects everyone. And she also does marketing, Facebook, Instagram, all of those things that really support the entire department, including social services.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I was thinking that, but I was like, let me just ask some questions so that I know for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. And just like Laura won the award for having the most simple, straightforward budget, I must win the award. I'm sure Patty would agree that I will win the award for the most confusing budget. So you get both sides of the spectrum here.
That's why we put you two together.
So moving on to community and neighborhood services. This is our Dial-A-Ride program is located here, as well as some funds that we that support 3 buildings that the town owns that we lease out to nonprofits to run. So the Dial-A-Ride program is we outsource to an organization called CTS. Don't ask me what the C stands for, Consolidated Transportation Services, I think. We have a long-term contract with them. Their current contract expires at the end of 24, and it has one more 2-year renewal left on it. They have been very responsive. We are happy with their service. But just like anything, we do have a limit on the amount of time, and it does help to go out to bid for this service. So we plan to do that. We plan to renew again through 2026, but again, that's not written in stone, but we do appreciate their work and their responsiveness. The general contributions that we make support the Sarah Whitman Hooker House, the West Hartford Art League, and the Noah Webster House. And primarily this budget is to help cover their utilities. We have lease agreements with them that says that the town will pay for certain things and that they will pay for certain things. So this is where we budget for the parts of the lease that we have to cover. we do support, the town in general supports other organizations as well. And I think you'll see that under the general government. And that's where we support other nonprofits that the town partners with, or organizations like that. So I think, Madam Chair, you had some questions about that, and I hope that that answers that part of your question.
Would this be a good time to ask about that?
Sure.
Sure. Okay, thank you. So I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. So under the general contributions, these are organizations that rent from us as a town, because we own the facilities. Are there other organizations that are also leasing space that we own that we are not helping them with utilities? I don't know who's the best person to ask that to, actually.
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't believe there are any others that we own, and the arrangement that we have set up with the Whitman House and the Art League. And Peter, Helen, back through you.
Yeah, Pete Privatera. I can't recall any other organization that rents out a building or a partial building from us. I mean, we have contracts for leasing part of the facility, like an Elmwood Community Center, the childcare center there, but not an entire building like this. Not that we would have a contractual arrangement where we're gonna pay for their utilities for them. I think this is a unique situation.
Yeah, so is this built, thank you for that. Is this built into the lease arrangement, say with the West Hartford Art League, that we're going to contribute $15,000 towards their utilities each year?
That's correct. And it varies slightly per year, but it generally falls about the same. So it's generally about the numbers that you see here, about 5,000 for Sarah Whitman Hooker. And that is the rest of the operating of that, and the improvements come from a foundation that oversees that building. The West Hartford Art League, again, those are that's approximately what we budget for their utilities. And with Noah
Great.
Webster.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. So moving forward, we'll go to Elmwood Community Center's budget.
I just have a
Again.
question.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
So that is a point that I wanted to get to. So we not only provide, I think someone has their so we not only provide those grants, but also in the general government also. I know it's outside of this space, but in the annual budgets in our council budget, and we can talk about another point, but are these contributions to outside agencies that we have in the general government in addition to this number as well, or is it included in that number?
It's in addition, for you, Madam Chair. It's two separate. So Helen is responsible for the building she just described, and then we have a separate $108,000 allocation that the town council makes to 8 nonprofit agencies that we've worked with for a number of years. And then the list has changed a little bit over time. It's been pretty consistent with the group, the 8 that we're making these contributions to, at least over the last 5 or 6 years anyways. The numbers, as you've noticed, also have not changed much. Last year, WHCI TV, through all of the work that they did for our community through the pandemic, did request an additional amount to our annual contribution that we make towards them, and we signed off on that through last year's budget process.
And if you're looking, this is Helen Rubino Turco. If you're looking for that list, it's on page 4-5 of the budget book under general government.
Thank you. Counselor Sweeney, do you have additional follow-up questions on that?
No, I'm sorry. We can keep going. Thank you.
So So I'll just follow up with a question on that and then see if others also have questions. What would be the appropriate committee to discuss those contributions that are listed through the general government area?
That's in mind.
Finance and administration?
Yes.
Okay, so we may or may not come back to that in a different committee meeting. Great, thank you. Before we move on, do any other counselors have questions for Helen?
Yes. Hi, this is Mary Fay. Thank you, Counselor Pullen. I remember that dial-a-ride was a big issue a couple budget cycles ago, Helen, and refresh me on the details. Is this an operation that we break even on by, because I know there's a person who use it, they have a copay or whatever, so to speak. The people who use it and they have X amount of rides, they pay a flat fee. I forget exactly how it works. So can you just tell me, do we subsidize this? And it's not a good or bad or a value question that I'm asking. It's just, I want to know the answer because I think it's very important for older people to be able to use the service. But do we subsidize it or does it break even on its own? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fay. This is Helen Rubino Turco to answer that question. It is subsidized by the general fund budget, yes. It is somewhat offset by the fee, the membership fee that a dial-a-ride user pays. It's $50 per year. We also receive some contributions from people who want to help subsidize that program. So generally, we might raise, it generally costs, we carry a budget line of about $275,000 to run the program.
Thank you.
And
That's yeah.
Yeah, and that's simply the contract with the provider.
Yeah, and by the way, you mentioned CTS. They were the exclusive transporter for us when I worked at Sun Life, and they're a very, very good, solid company, exquisite service. So I know you have to shop the bids every once in a while, but you know, as a customer for CTS, I thought they were terrific and very reliable. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we turn our attention to Elmwood Community Center and our senior centers. The Elmwood Community Center, again, here you will see a return to pre-pandemic levels. We do see, you'll also note in the advertising line a big decrease, and that again is because we shifted the expense to the management, the administrative account at the beginning. And as I said, this is also where we have our marketing person spends she is located at the community center, but half of her is funded in our administrative account. Our two senior centers are really operating as, we really think of them as one center with two divisions, two branches, sort of like the library. And so really what we found during the pandemic, as I think I explained in the past, is that we really found that people would go to either one depending on you know, what their interest level was on, and we tried to do a variety of different programs at each one to attract both sides of town. And that certainly continues. So again, our temporary payroll is simply based on the increase in our programming, and that also goes under the contractual services for both senior centers. If we
Hold on one second. Yep. Pete?
Sorry, Pete Privatera. I just wanted to make a comment with regard to Elmwood Community Center, because you'll see that, you know, there's a significant increase on the expense side, but then you'll notice there's a larger increase on the revenue side. So that's because of all the programming that's back in effect. So when you see that, you know, 18.2% increase on the expense side, look up to see the 44.7% increase on the revenue side. I just wanted to make that point because Helen's folks are back in the programming business now. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions on the Elmwood Community Center or either senior center? I have an adjacent question, so I'm not sure if this is the right area, but are we still funding the senior job bank, and where is that? If so, where is that located in our budget?
I don't have it in my budget.
So we provide them space. I don't believe we don't provide them any funding through our budget, Madam Chair.
Yeah, it's an
Okay.
in-kind contribution.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move ahead.
So if we move into parks and gyms and the last two and outdoor pools, this is the last two sections of the general fund part of my budget. The only kind of major change that I see here is that you know how we a little bit of percent of person here, person here, person here, and one person gets divvied up into 4 different places. We just tried to make it a little bit more simple, and we consolidated the parks supervisor. The majority of his general fund is here, and the majority of the crew leader is in the pool area. Just that's where their expertise are. So we figured that's where we would code them. Otherwise, the contractual continues to be one area that we always look at is we have these special tennis courts at Fern Park, and they're very popular with some people, but they do require a lot of individual hand care. So again, this is something that we're looking at in the future is, do we want to keep this expensive maintenance item, or, you know, at some point in the future when we redo those tennis courts, is that something that we would think about changing out? But otherwise, this is also where we code the funding for in the parks and gyms area is where we code the Hillcrest camp. So we provide a free camp to people from the Hillcrest neighborhood. So this is where we code the labor that's associated with that camp, also the busing. So they do other activities in the morning, then they get bused to the swimming pool, and they have a camp in the afternoon. It's very popular. In the outdoor pools division, we do see a pretty steep increase in our pool chemicals. This is very consistent with what we're seeing in general with materials like that, whether it's for grounds maintenance or for in pools. It seems to be a pandemic related crunch, but we do see it leveling off, but we don't see it dropping. So are there any other questions about the general fund portion of my budget?
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Sweeney?
Can you elaborate on the Hillcrest camp? This is the first I've heard of it.
Sure. As you know, we have Camp Funtastic is our bread and butter camp, and it operates at Eisenhower, Fern, and Beachland. But at Kennedy, we have a different camp, and it's called Camp Hillcrest, and it's free for people from the Hillcrest Neighborhood Outreach Center community. So they are bused, they go to Hillcrest, they're bused over, and they have swim lessons, just like as if you were going to a regular camp. But it's from the afternoon, it's in the afternoon as opposed to a morning and afternoon. In the morning, they have programs at Hillcrest. So that are optional, but many of them do. So this supports it pretty much full participation. So we don't have empty spaces, and that we've been doing this for years. So the cost is for the camp counselors and the camp supervisor, as well as the busing.
Well, I was at the Kennedy pool for a while when I was much younger, and didn't notice the two connections, but thank you for that. The question I have is like, is there, would there be, so how do you generate the expense for this based on, how do you project it out, I guess?
The expenses are based on the staffing that we need and the cost of the bus. So we have a bus contract.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this piece of the budget? Mr. Cortez, and then we'll go to Ms. Blanks.
You, Madam Chair. So I'm looking at the Parks and Gym Division, and then so the overtime. I see that compared to last year, there's a significant increase in the overtime. So I just had a question with regards to that. And my second question is with transportation. I see we have proposed 10,000. Do you think that that is enough with just the cost of everything going up to 10,000? Do you think we'll go a bit beyond that?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cortez, for those questions. The temporary payroll, we do have minimum wage going up on June 1st. So this does reflect the increase of minimum wage, as well as the support that we provide all of the parks in the summer. So we do have kind of a return to more normal levels of attention to our parks, but we've seen minimum wage go up 5 times since the beginning of 2021. So that, it is just an incremental increase for that part-time payroll.
I was talking in regards to the overtime.
Oh, the overtime, I'm sorry.
Yeah, because we're at 2,500 last year. We're at 11,500 this year, and I know that in 2021 we were higher than 2,500. We were in the 10,000 range back then. So
Right, and this budget is really based on the callbacks for when they have to come in, and but it's also for shoveling. So it depends also, this is a budget that goes all summer as well as all winter. So the callbacks are often for plowing in the winter, and we do code that overtime here. So it really just depends on the weather, but we do expect that it would be about that. We also, some winters there's no snow. We're keeping our fingers crossed that this is one of those winters that, we skated by with very little overtime in that area.
so thank you for that. And then the other question was transportation. If that was if you feel that that could possibly go over just with the trend of everything going up the past year or so.
Right. So this is, we did factor in busing costs increase for this appropriation. So we do think that we would be able to meet that number.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Blanks?
Thank you, Councilor Poland, and thank you, Helen. I too didn't realize that you had this camp over at Kennedy, and funny enough, I just walked through Kennedy a couple of days ago, so I got to see some of the work that we're doing on those on the facilities there. But my question, Helen, is around the staffing. How many staff members are involved in the camp, and what are the hours of the camp since it's in the afternoon? What time do the campers arrive and what time do they leave, and approximately how many campers? Oh, sorry.
I would have to get back to you on the exact.
Okay, no problem. You can do that. Just trying to get a idea in terms of context and funding.
Right. It is organized through the Hillcrest Area Neighborhood Outreach Center. So Suzanne Oslander does
So
the
Hannah,
outreach and gets the paperwork done and the sign-offs done. So I will check with her on kind of the past registrations, but I do know that they max out, but I just don't recall whether it's 40
okay.
kids per session, per 2-week session, or if it's a larger number.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Langs. Any other questions on this, on the general fund portion? All right, let's go forward.
Thank you. So we'll now turn to the Leisure Services Fund, and I will ask, if necessary, Pete Privatera to step in to elaborate on how this fund functions. But this fund was set up in the 1980s when outsourcing or creating these sort of enterprise funds was very popular. And then in the year 2000, we renovated the skating rink and the debt service was added to this budget. So it became a very large hill to climb out of. There are 4 major components to this fund, which is really set up to operate like a business. So we take in revenue and it's supposed to cover the costs. But we also have some other factors that muddy the water. For example, we provide free use of the skating rink for 3 hockey teams, the boys team from Conard, the boys team from Hall, and the combined girls team, as well as 4 teams at swim teams at Cornerstone Aquatic Center, because we have 2 boys teams and 2 girls teams, so that they get free use. We also provide free use of our golf courses to the Hall and Conard boys and girls teams. So again, off the bat, you're sort of, behind the 8 ball. We also respect and utilize employees who are in unions. And so we have to be very careful about making sure that we stay on this, that we follow all of the rules and regulations in terms of overtime or working on a weekend, because this is a 24/7, 7 days a week operation in the summer, right? The pools are open, as you know, on the general fund side, but on the enterprise fund side, Cornerstone's open 7 days a week, the rink is open 7 days a week, golf is open 7 days a week, and our camps are Monday through Friday. But those are the 4 major kind of components. When I started 10 years ago, the first thing that I really paid attention to was the rink. And we changed the whole operations there, and it continues to function in a really positive way. We've reduced the way we've managed it completely changed. We had 3 full-time people in the building from basically 8:30 to 4:30, and anyone who spent any time in a rink knows that besides it smelling really bad, is that it's very busy in the afternoon and in the evening and on weekends. And so we did change that, have 2 full-time people there. One works a staggered schedule Tuesday through Saturday, and the other one works Monday through Friday. And the Tuesday through Saturday person starts later in the day and stays later into the evening. And so that really helps us stay efficient, because people tend to be more efficient when there's a full-time person watching over them. Then we turned our attention to Cornerstone, and we have had very good response and experience with Health Fitness, who runs Cornerstone Aquatic Center and has for about 5 years now. Maybe it might be a little bit longer, but 5 years, I think, because then they've been interrupted by the pandemic, but also 3 major construction projects. The family changing rooms, the 2 locker rooms, and and now some of the roof units. So we are very pleased with, if you look down at Cornerstone, they really are starting to break even and make a profit. They've changed the way they organize, and we will be coming back to you for some price adjustments as we discussed in committee in January, probably later this spring. That would start July 1. The third component are our camps, and we've already discussed that our camps are have remained very popular after you know, kind of a dip during the pandemic. But just to reiterate, on February 1st, we had from noon until 6, we basically had nearly 6,000 registrations. And between February 1st and March 13th, today, we have over 9,000 registrations. The number goes up daily. I would say that, 60% of the registrations came in on the first day. And that is a challenge, but it's also just a testament to the way people operate now. They want a deadline, they want it online. People used to come to town hall with their registration forms, and now we counsel them to do it all ahead of time, to make sure they know what they want, to make sure that their account is set up and is up to date, and they can go right on and register for their programs. So we're very pleased with how the camps are doing. And then the final component is the golf course. As you know, we have 2 golf courses, but it's easy to focus on Rockledge, which is the main one. Its popularity, of course, rose during the pandemic due to the constriction of other sports and a shift to flexible work at home schedules that people had. And for the last 3 golfing seasons, rounds of golf have topped 40,000 from a low of about 33.8 in 2019. So we have seen a resurgence in popularity of the golf course. Keep in mind that everything I do straddles the fiscal line. So we look at golf as a season as opposed to a fiscal year. So we keep 2 sets of numbers because we can never, it's hard to keep track. But we talk about golf in a season, if you will. So again, reaching that 40,000 rounds of golf was a big deal. Of course, the pandemic has also affected our operating expenses, typically in the area of grounds maintenance materials. So we can talk about that too. But what we've adopted last year, what our estimate is very different from what we adopted. And we do estimate breaking even this year. And our proposal next year does show a profit again. Fee increases really will help us meet our revenue goal. There are 4 parts to the revenue at a golf course, as you probably know. Greens fees, golf cart rentals, the restaurant, and the driving range. And we did increase fees at the greens fees and cart rentals, and we continue to kind of tweak our operations to increase that revenue stream. We do anticipate increasing the season memberships again next year. The restaurant has shown market improvement over the past 2 fiscal years. So they are operating very well. They're successful, and we, as part of their lease agreement, receive a portion of revenues over a certain dollar amount. The driving range is an underperforming asset. So we do plan to develop the driving range to really maximize its potential. So what you will see when we get to the capital budget is some investment in that driving range that will generate revenue, substantial revenue. And this is based on what we've seen in the industry, as well as what we've seen of some nearby competitors. So again, the cost drivers for golf are wages, which are contractual. The benefits, again, these allocations are related to medical insurance and risk programs. And then the maintenance materials, as I mentioned earlier, chemicals, fertilizer, seed. We've seen a 35% increase from those costs across the board. We do see those leveling off, but we don't necessarily see them going down. So we just have to be very careful and about where we're using them and to try and reduce that footprint. But the capital improvements is one area where, in order to retain our competitive edge, is really to reinvest. And this is a town asset. This is something that is mentioned on many of the accolades that the town receives through various rating agencies or magazines that are discussing, why was Hartford such a great place to live. So we do see that this driving range, when we get to the capital budget, we're going to see, we can discuss that again in a little bit. But we do account for some of the driving range revenue. The increased revenue from the range is captured in the proposed budget. Peter, did you have anything to add about the history of the payment plans?
I can Pete Privatera, Finance Director. I can try to speak to the negative fund balance. There's two components. There's the operational deficit, and then there's the debt service deficit. We've been contributing $50,000 a year from the debt service fund to slowly reduce that debt service balance over time. With respect to the operational balance, it's when we're trying to run this as a business, but I think you can appreciate that if you're running it as a business, you have to have revenues to cover all your expenses. And if we're giving away free swim time, free ice time, free golf time, all that time adds up to lost revenue. When Helen spoke about the capital project for the driving range, that will not be an open driving range. That'll be a covered driving range. It'll be a year-round driving range with heated stalls. People could go there year-round and hit a bucket of balls as long as there's no snow on the ground. We did a little research and found that, other facilities and other courses around us are making a significant amount of revenue, and that spills over from the driving range to their restaurants and so forth. So if that capital project is approved, I think we're estimating $150,000 of revenue next year and upwards of $300,000 of revenue moving forward.
Before we talk about capital, though, can we just take a step backwards and just make sure that, since there's a few of us who are new on the council, that we understand really how this works? And practically speaking, how do we carry a negative balance forward? Like, where's the money that we owe? Like, who do we owe it to? And how do we get it? And all of that, like, just in practical layman terms.
Right. Basically, this fund owns the town or the pool cash account $3.8 million. What happens is we cover their expenses, and at the end of the year, if there's a surplus, it reduces the amount of money that's owed. For instance, you'll see in the proposed budget that our expectation is that we're going to make $453,000 of a positive balance. If that's the case, then that'll reduce the amount of money that this fund owes the general fund by that amount, and it'll reduce the negative fund balance from 4.3 million to roughly 3.8 million. So for all intents and purposes, we're loaning the money to this fund with the expectation that we're going to get it back over time. from an accounting perspective, it's kind of a due to pull cash of the amount of money that we loaned out. And it doesn't show up, it doesn't impact our general fund because it's an enterprise fund. From an accounting perspective, our expectation is that we will get this money back eventually, and we're showing it in that manner.
But why do we think just to probe a little bit, why do we think we're going to get that money back eventually? It seems like, I mean, it's a big hole we're trying to climb out of, right?
Well,
And it seems like we're getting a little bit out of it every year, but I'm just not sure I see the plan for us to get fully out of it.
Well, I mean, there are a couple of options here, and one is, it is an enterprise fund, but we're dealing with public facilities. So when you talk about raising rates, you have to be cognizant of the impact that it's going to have on the public. So we're very conservative when we talk about raising rates. On the other hand, we are losing revenue. I think at one point we did an analysis. I think, Helen, we're losing about $300,000 a year in revenue because of all the free time we're giving the schools. So we're not going to charge the schools for that time, but again, that's money that's not coming into the enterprise fund because we're not charging them. So I mean, at one point we talked about, well, what's the possibility of making a general fund contribution to the fund to offset that liability? We did talk about that years ago, but it never came to fruition. I think our best bet here is to try to come up with a plan where we can increase our revenues conservatively, or try to do different things like, we're making more money now on our restaurant than we had in the past. This driving range, if it comes up to what we think it will have a significant inflow of revenue to this fund as well. But we're kind of limited on what we can and can't do, because basically it's a simple equation. If you don't take in revenue to offset the expenses, and again, pairing, we've looked at these accounts and we've pared back as much as we can without impacting the services that are provided. So we're kind of in a box here, because we have limited options here to raise revenue, and limited options to reduce expenses, because then we'd be reducing programming that the residents are accustomed to having.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that explanation. That's helpful for me. It doesn't quite get me in the place of solving the problem yet, but it puts me in a better place. I do just want to say, I think we need to be really careful about how we frame up the use of our golf, swim, and rink facilities for our high school teams. I think the idea of framing it up as they're using it for free, or we're giving it to them for free, that I just don't really like that frame up, because these are residents of our town, and teams that we all are very proud of and want our kids to be able to participate in. So I just personally, I would prefer to not use that frame up. Do other counselors? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. The only reason I'm saying that is because it's an enterprise fund. If it was in the general fund, we wouldn't use those terms, but because I do know that, we do use school fields, if I'm not mistaken, Helen, and we're not being charged for the usage of the schools, but it's not an enterprise fund. It's part of their operations. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I understand. It's sort of inside baseball term. Just need to be careful and saying it out loud in a public setting, because I'm positive that isn't how anybody in this town feels that we're, that we ought to be charging for the use of these facilities for these teams. Do any other counselors have questions on this? Mr. Zdanowicz?
Thank you. And kind of glad to hear about the driving range and the amount, some money that's going to be put in there, because I kind of grew up in the neighborhood that I think you're referring to, and I've grew up playing there, right next door, and they've always had great facilities, and now they're even improving their driving range. Again, after probably 10, 12 years ago where they improved it. and they saw the benefits of it. So I'm glad that we're getting past that power curve there for some additional revenue. And then I guess what Councilor Poland was saying about the nuances in relationship, I too also had a comment about the free hockey, golf, and swimming, because there is a pay to play. And, you know, so our kids are paying to play sports. And I'm wondering, maybe because it's an enterprise account and not a general fund account, that money isn't going toward there, because there is a fund that the kids have to use to play sports. So I'm wondering how that line item doesn't make it over versus basketball, you know, paying for, you know, new nets, new basket, I don't know, whatever that goes on to, football, new uniforms and things like that. So, you know, and I know we all raise money for different things too for the sports, but can you just talk about the nuances of relationship as a general fund versus enterprise, and why that pay to play is not showing up in there either?
Sure. I'm assuming you're referring to pay to play in the Board of Education budget?
Correct.
Okay.
We took it out. It was taken out during the pandemic. It's put back in. And if you have to pay, you know, for 3 sports, 3 varsity sports each time.
Okay.
4, actually.
Yeah. I'm you know, I'm assuming that pay to play offsets the cost associated with providing that sport in the school. Whether it's, you know, and again, I'm just assuming whether it's uniforms, whether it's paying for officiating, whatever the case may be. But you know, it's not coming to the town. And when I, you know, and I just want to clarify one thing. I'm not advocating for the schools to pay for the time they use in the pools and on the golf courses and whatever. It's just that when this is an enterprise fund, it's just we're looking at revenues and expenditures. It's not the general fund. So there's a huge distinction there. But as far as I know, and Helen, you can correct me, I don't think we receive any revenue whatsoever from the board as a transfer for pay to play. I'm not familiar with that. Helen, are you?
No, we don't. But again, you know, we really consider ourselves as brothers and sisters, right? So the board is a relative, and we use their gym space, and we use some of the fields, and we, you know, they use some of our facilities. So we just feel that's, you know, that's the spirit in which we provide these. But again, when we're talking about it as a business enterprise, you know, it is something that we felt we needed to mention. Maybe the town manager has some additional comments.
Thanks, Helen. I was only going to say to Peter's earlier point, not really knowing how those pay to play fees, where they go. They do go to uniforms and referees and CIAC, you know, all of that is where those fees go. So there's no direct payment back to the town for use of the ice rinks or the pools or anything like that. But that
Sorry, Rick, you're on mute.
was I on mute that whole time? Oh,
Yeah.
Just for the last 3
Oh,
or 4 seconds.
accidentally hit. Okay. You know, we are very cognizant of the health of this fund, and we're very committed to reducing this deficit that we have built up over many, many years. And the way we do that is by managing our expenses and looking for revenue enhancements when we can. You know, we've talked a little bit about the driving range that will have a significant impact on the Leisure Services Fund as we move forward. We have reduced that deficit by $750,000 over the last 3 years, and we're going to continue to build on that over the next few years. We'd love to say, you know, and I'm not going to say, you know, 2 years from now we will eliminate the deficit completely, but 5, 6 years from now, 7 years from now, we may be in a position where this has been wiped out and we've paid back the general fund this deficit. I'll pause there and turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. That's good to hear. I see, Lisa, you have your hand raised.
I think that might have been done by accident because she texted me and she told me she had no audio or video. I don't know.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay. Any other counselors have questions? Deputy Mayor Sweeney?
Thank you for that. To Mark's and Deb's point, I mean, I do think that if the Board of Ed is going to require students to pay for their sports, then we should be appropriately collecting that revenue through the town. I think it's on the Board of Ed if they would like to continue that policy. But I think that if we're going to do that, then we should figure out, Helen, why I totally agree with what you're saying, but I think because of how we have multiple different accounts, this is an enterprise account. I think to Peter's point, you know, if that is the case and that the Board of Ed is requiring kids to pay for that money should be put back to paying for those facilities. I mean, the Board of Ed can make their own policy decision on whether or not they want to continue to charge that fee. That's, you know, we can't be involved in that. But if that is revenue that should go to, you know, to the services that the town through these specific funds are paying for, then I think we should probably bring that money back to where it is supposed to go. I would then also just kind of want to talk a little bit more about Rockledge, and maybe we can have a more kind of broken down idea on the revenue here. Because I think what we're going to hear again is we're going to want to increase fees, as Helen said, and what we just haven't seen is kind of how do we right this ship over there. And I think the team is doing everything that we can, but it just seems like whatever we're doing is not necessarily working. I know that you know, both I would love to see what we are in regards to where Manchester's golf course, you know, Stanley. I actually was just texting with someone from New Britain about this and asking them where they are, and they're almost net positive over there. They will be once they're going to pay off their new driving range with cash, actually. So, and then they will take all the new revenue into their general fund. So I think that those are kind of some innovative ways to do it. I think that it's great that we're going to make a capital investment, but before we make any capital investment, I'd really like to have an idea what's going on and why can't we correct this issue on our own through general operating issues that continue to exist year after year. Do we need to figure out, you know, from a holistic standpoint, why the course can't make money? I think it's just a real general problem, and I think that Helen did an excellent job right-sizing something that we had historically had a big problem with over there, with the previous pro having a very nice deal through the town. And I thought Helen and Peter did an excellent job of right-sizing that. But I think, you know, that was I guess what I'm shocked at is that it hasn't turned around kind of the overall revenue stream of Rockledge, because of the deal wasn't. And for folks institutionally, what the deal was is that the previous pro owned the carts and we leased them, and so we got a piece of what he was making. And so now I believe we have the golf carts. That's correct? And so that we're, instead of making a percentage, that we're paying a percentage to the pro as opposed to the pro paying us. And so I think that's a great, you know, turnaround. But I would just kind of want to figure out, do we need to like holistically look at, you know, what we're doing there before we make a significant investment? Is there something that we can do to make the experience better? You know, I know that every time you look to play there, it's booked. So, you know, it just seems like there's just something that we're maybe missing, and it's been an enigma on every leisure services budget that I've looked at, and I know that Helen's worked really hard at it, but it may just require us to take a step back on this as opposed to just kind of, throwing an investment at that we don't really know how that's going to play out. I'd be open to looking at tons of different options, even if we need to like get a golf course consultant or somebody to look at like how do we fix this problem over a period of time. And have we already had someone look at this? But I just continue. We just year after year we just keep having this conversation of like it's running negative, and I have kids yelling in the background, so I apologize. But I'd love to figure that out, and that goes with the other facilities as well. Any way that we can holistically look at this and not just lose money on these things.
Thank you. Other questions? And then after this piece, Mr. Manager, do we go to the capital improvement plan pieces as well during this meeting, or?
We do, Madam Chair.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Are there any other questions before we move over to the capital improvement plan?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to say that there's two other funds to discuss, the Community Development Block Grant Funds.
Yes,
And
sorry about that.
They are not, they're fairly, Laura will be happy, fairly drama-free. We receive funds annually from HUD to support programs and services for low and moderate income residents as well as people with disabilities. We are expecting about the same amount that we received last year. It's it's slightly less than about $2,000 less, so it's maybe $990,000 in the coming year. And the bulk of it is housing rehabilitation, as well as our the food pantry operations, our volunteer services, and the Hillcrest Area Neighborhood Outreach Center, and some administrative costs. Though we do have portions of various salaries coded to CDBG as appropriate. And we do have one full-time person coded completely to CDBG, and that would be Luan Sika, who is our housing rehab specialist, as well as the CDBG coordinator. The Westmore Park Fund also operates outside of tax dollars. It generates revenue and it has expenditures. The revenues come from basically three places. It was, as you probably know, and Ms. McGinnis, since you are new, but you may be familiar with Westmore Park, it was donated to the town in 1974, along with a modest trust fund, actually two trust funds, with the intention that it would never be a burden on the taxpayers. And so those trust funds generate revenue. And when interest rates were very high, it more than covered the operating costs. And anything above that was put into, wasn't lost, but it was put into what we call the Westmore Park Fund. And when we also generate revenue from program income and from donations. We also now have, for the last 10 years, this year will be the 10th annual Feast on the Farm. We do raise funds for capital improvements at Westmore Park. When interest rates were lower and produced not enough, sometimes we have to draw from the Westmore Park Fund to help cover our expenditures. But again, it has multiple facets. It has a demonstration farm. It has the Eco Venture program, so public school children come there and they pay for the programs. And we also have a very popular summer camp and year-round programs for everyone. So that is the final report there, you will see in there the decrease again in the advertising because we've pooled that in the general fund. We actually split it between the general fund and the leisure services fund, the cost of the brochure. Are there any questions about those last two funds? I know we went through them pretty quick, but
Anyone have questions? All right. Thank you. And we'll move on to the capital improvement fund.
thank you. So for our so the town of West Hartford has this very large, long 12-year outlook that we develop for our capital improvement plan. The Parks and Recreation section is very much a collaboration with Public Works and sometimes with Plant and Facilities, who oversees our facilities. So you'll sometimes see some mingling or some bleeding over from one to another when we go through our capital improvement plan. But this is how we set out what our goals are and where we anticipate where we're going to need to do things 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out. So many of the items that you see listed in year 1 and 2 pretty much go forward. But sometimes we need to tweak things based on real time or what we're currently seeing, which is that everything's coming back almost double what we thought it was going to cost. So when we're evaluating our priorities, and Public Works is the same way, we use the following determining factors. Is there a safety concern, like an uneven playing field? Is there a code violation, like fencing? Is it going to save money over time, right? So investing in irrigation is a good example where it will save you money over time because you will use less water because you can turn it off remotely. You're not having lots of leaks, that kind of thing. Also in that saving money over time, again, in the irrigation area, when I'm redoing a field, we always put in irrigation. And the main factor here is we're seeing also a trend towards organics and away from pesticides, but those organics require water to work. And if you don't have water, it fails. So we've been doing various studies in a couple of different locations in town, one in a park and one next to a school, where we were doing this organics program to see, how successful it was and what the long-term effects are of that program. And it is more costly, no doubt, but it also it is contingent on having water available. And then the fourth element that we use is quality of life. And this sometimes falls into the nice to have category, but it's also things that our community really wants. And so we have added that as a category because we do want to take into account what we're hearing from our community. That being said, Madam Chair, you were kind enough to send some questions ahead of time. So hopefully as we go through, we will be able to address some of the questions that you had. So we're going to begin on page 3-22, which is program year 1. And we'll just turn to the leisure services side, the Parks and Recreation side. I also wanted to mention that the source of funding for many of these programs come from a variety of buckets. So just wanted, in the Just wanted to make sure I was keeping you awake because this also gets complicated. Some of them are bonds, so we bond for some things. Some of them are capital non-recurring expenditures, and some are grants, and some come from special revenue funds. The grants might come from CDBG, for example. The Community Development Block Grant funding can be used for improvements in low and moderate income neighborhoods, as well as for handicapped accessibility. Special revenue funds include Westmore Park. It also includes Rockledge. Rockledge has a fund where a portion of every grounds fee that a player pays goes into a fund that helps reinvest in course improvements. And those are more operating course improvements that are done about $25,000. So every other year we take 50 grand out of the Rockledge Improvement Fund and reinvest it in the facility. Are there any questions so far? Okay, so in outdoor pools, we draw about $50,000 per year for the operating improvements for the outdoor pools. We don't carry this in the general fund in our operating budget every year. It comes from this account. And that means it just gives us more flexibility. If we don't use it all, it stays there until the next year. But we pay for new boilers. We might pay to repaint the pools. We'll pay for new updates to the splash pads if a splash pad needs to be replaced or repaired, more likely. Because if it's something that costs over $100,000, we can bond for it. But these are the smaller things that don't rise to the level of kind of a capital expenditure bonded funding, but we don't carry it in our operating. So you'll see this for outdoor pools as well as for our park and playscape management. And that's just where there's a lot of repairs, but we don't know what they're going to be until, you know, you kind of open up the box and see how do things look this year. Oh, well, we see we've got a lot of cracks in this port. We're going to have to make the repair. Yes, Peter.
Thank you, Finance Director Helen Rubino. I just want to make a clarification. I'm only kidding, Helen. There's a distinction between bonded, capital non-recurring, and the rest of the categories. When you approve a capital budget, you approve the first 2 years of bonding, which means that departments can ask to spend the second year as well as the first year. The capital non-recurring expense, our capital expenses, we basically like to use those expenses. We should use those expenses for capital related expenses, something that's going to last more than 10 years. But they're coming out of the capital non-recurring fund. They don't reach the litmus test of being a bonded capital expense. Okay. In this proposed budget, in the first year, there is no general fund contribution to capital non-recurring expenses. The entire 1.366 million is coming out of the capital non-recurring fund balance. And usually this the CNRE account is funded by a general fund contribution or by fund balance. And if you recall, we asked you to allow us to transfer $1.6 million of fund balance from last year into the CNRE fund. So the majority of that is going to use this. At the end of the year, if you don't spend the CNRE money, if it's a general fund contribution, then it's lost. It doesn't carry over. But on the bonded side, you know, the project will still remain authorized. And again, Helen talked about the other funds that are used, but I just wanted to talk about the bonding piece of it because that's the more substantial piece. So when you approve this budget, you are, even though it's a 12-year plan, you're authorizing the use of bonded funds for the first 2 years of this plan. So just wanted to throw that out there, Helen. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you for that. Well, we can just go through each one if that's okay.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Privatera. The Kennedy Park is undergoing some renovations, and you will see we have already we have 2 projects queued up there in this budget, in this capital plan. So it's part of a larger long-term park renovation. You have already seen the soccer fields were renovated with new irrigation up there. The baseball fields were renovated with new irrigation. So both of those happened in the last 2 years. We also redid the basketball courts there using post-tension concrete technology. This is something that we try to do a project every other year. And that is funded, since that is a major project. Those are bonded projects with a 30-year lifespan. So we try to do one every other year, and in the in-between years is when we work with Public Works on doing major field renovations. We also work with outside organizations. So in the past, and Madam Chair, you mentioned soccer fields. Many of the fields, well, 5 of the fields that we have in our inventory were built and funded by our community soccer foundation, which is now has stopped. We've closed it. We, meaning not me, the town, but me, the person, because I started that in 1999, and we built 5 fields. But we basically felt that we have finished our goal of building soccer fields, and now we're turning it to the youth leagues to continue to collect a user fee that they then reinvest back into the fields. Not on a large scale, like we're, like the $800,000 that it cost to build the Glover Soccer Complex, but smaller events, smaller renovations are still being the community is still contributing to those. So in Kennedy, what we do have one is a plan to redo the parking lot. This is a park that doesn't have adequate parking for its neighborhood, but we also want to see a road that penetrates into the park that goes back towards the soccer field and the baseball field, maybe for handicap parking, for people that would like to go and see their grandson play or granddaughter play soccer, but also just to kind of reconfigure some of the amenities that are there. So it will require perhaps to renovate or relocate some of the playscapes, as well as eventually redo the splash pad. And these are all projects that are queued up for the next few years. But the Kennedy Park bonded portion is the parking lot. And then in a few pages, you'll see us suggesting that we consider using community development block grant funds to fund one of the playscapes, the playscape replacement. When we turn to our park and playfield improvements, this is, again, this is a bonded project, and it is in conjunction with input that we receive from our partners in Public Works. So you do see some projects that are on school fields that are in my budget, but you also see some that are on the Board of Ed side. So the way we sort of divvied it up is they will put in for funding for projects that are at the high school, even though the youth leagues use those facilities, whether it's the turf field, the stadium field that the youth leagues use, or whether it's the tennis courts that we might have a tennis and swim camp where they play tennis at the hall and then they go to Eisenhower to swim in the afternoon. So when we are very much siblings in that way. So we have they dedicate their funds to at the high school level, and we've taken on field improvements at the middle school level. So in the past, you might have recall seeing that we funded the renovation of the King Philip school grounds, some of the fields there. And then in this case, we're talking about doing Sedgwick. The whole Sedgwick complex is in pretty bad shape. We plan to do it in 2 increments. So the first increment is the baseball field, which the high school does use, but also youth leagues use it. And then the outlying fields are largely used by soccer and by I think it's Little League. So that's what the park and playfield improvement recommendation is this year. It is Sedgwick baseball. Next year it will be Eisenhower basketball. The year after that, it will be Beachland basketball. So again, we're trying to go to various sites and make sure that we are sticking to our plan based on, again, safety concerns, code violations, saving money over time. Going to post-tension concrete has been a great decision. It has reduced the maintenance costs dramatically, and we'll see that continue for the next 20 years because they have such a long lifespan. We won't be spending money filling cracks. We started with Walcott Park was our first post-tension concrete. We also did the tennis courts at Whiting Lane Park. And so then we did the courts at Buena Vista, where we did use some ARPA funding to help because the costs, again, kept going up more than we had anticipated. But so we do, this is an important investment that we like to see, and we're doing it every other year. When we move to...
Before we move on?
Sure.
Yeah, so let's, I just wanted to clarify what my question was regarding this particular recommendation, and also because other people on the call don't know what the question was that I sent you. I'd like to just state it for the public. So I had just noticed that under park and playfield improvements, we are renovating the Sedgwick baseball field in year 1, and then in year 2, we're looking at the baseball field at Eisenhower. And under year 1, we're saying if we have additional funds, then we might do regrading for the Beachland soccer field. And I'm just very aware of the fact that we're pouring money into 2 different baseball fields and maybe setting aside funds for the soccer field at Beachland, and noticing that that doesn't really promote gender equality. And I'm wondering if there is a reason why we are supporting a sport where the predominance of youth playing are boys versus a sport like soccer where it's both boys and girls. I just want to try to understand the reasoning behind that.
Sure. This is Helen Rubino Turco to answer that question. For a point of clarification, in year 2, it's for Eisenhower basketball to redo the basketball courts. If there are funds left over, we would make some improvements to the baseball field there.
That's where I was pulling the languages for the baseball fields as well. Yeah.
So as I said, some of earlier is that many of our soccer fields are in fairly good shape. And that is because some of them are new in the last 10 to 20 years. But we have built into the capital plan renovating those fields also. So in the out years, we have Eisenhower soccer in 2027, Fern tennis in 2028, and then I believe the Glover soccer complex in 2029, if I'm not mistaken. So we do try to syncopate the sports, but basically we go first with our partners in Public Works, what is the highest need that you see? What's the field in the worst condition that is creating a hazard? And that's sort of when we started to build these. What you didn't see was 2 years ago, it was the soccer field at Kennedy Park. So we do, you know, they are done. It's just, it appears that it is an isolated thing.
Yeah, so just thinking about the way this is worded, and maybe the wording could be more artful, but in year one, if there's funding left over, we're going to regrade Beachland's soccer field. But then in year two, we don't start with regrading Beachland's soccer field, which was clearly identified as a priority, not the highest priority, but the second highest priority for year one. If we don't have funds left in year one, we don't go back and do that in year two. So I don't really understand why that is.
And again, I would probably need to have Justin Andrews from Public Works join me. But he's the one that helps advise me about what his priorities are. And I either agree, or I might say, you're going to have to wait a year for that. What I understand from Beachland is the regrading is needed or because that field floods, and you know, it hasn't been received much attention since it received an irrigation system, and that was probably 15 years ago. The reason why we hedged it about saying if funds allow is because of this uncertainty about how much funding things are costing. And so we wanted to be very honest with, it's possible that all of the 400,000 will be taken up with the irrigation system, but based on our very recent projects with irrigation, we feel that there will be funds that will be available. We also have partnerships with youth soccer. We have partnerships with other teams, other youth leagues that have contributed significant funding, including youth baseball. So we do also rely and work with them. Sometimes it's a matching situation. If they contribute 30,000, then we would contribute 30,000. So it's possible that we can maximize the involvement of our community to help resolve that problem if in fact it becomes a problem. Does that answer your question?
I'm not sure. I'm going to think on it. I'll let you know if I have additional follow-ups, but I want to open up for other questions from council members on this piece. If not, Mr. Manager?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I see exactly your point on the Beachland Park grading project. And I think, Helen, what we would do is in year two, if we don't do it this year, we'll use year two funds, and we should make sure that we articulate that in the CIP plan. So to the chair's point, if we had excess funds in year one, we would do it. But if we didn't, we should be doing it in year two, and we didn't identify that in the plan itself. And I know that's exactly what we would do, but we should clarify that in the final document.
Thank you.
And the narrative for year two.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Moving forward, the park and playscape management, again, this is on 3-25, and we're nearly finished with year one for Parks and Recreation. Is really, these are ongoing fencing and maintenance repairs, park benches, picnic tables. These add up. We tend to try and do a certain number per year. But it also, we have to react to changes that happen over the winter. Sometimes swings break, or parts of playscapes need to be replaced. So that's what that fund covers. The last three are all grants or special revenue. So we do expect that we will draw from the Rockledge Reserve Fund for capital improvements as usual every other year. Westmore Park has identified a project that they wanted to just put on our radar screen and appropriate the funds when the time comes to replace the utility shed that they have on their property. It's very quaint looking, but it has no floor. So it's basically the walls are wooden and they're right on the ground. So as you can imagine, over the last 20 years, they're not in great shape. That should be funded by donations. We have other projects at Westmore Park that will be funded by donations, including some handicapped accessible pathways that we're looking at. But I didn't include them here because they're still in the planning stages. And then the last one is the Kennedy Park Playscape, where we do intend to replace this playscape, but using CDBG funds because it is of its location, it's eligible at this time. And then the last one that we have here is pretty major, but it was something that we discussed earlier, and that is to invest in the one column of revenue streams that really is underutilized and untapped at this time. The golf range right now pulls in about $70,000 a year, and conservatively, we are planning on $300,000 per year. So your operating budget reflects about half of that, 150 from the driving range. But we do expect that it, based on anecdotal information from regional sources, that we can expect to pull in as much as 500. We're being conservative and planning on 3, but we do think that this is an important reinvestment in a town asset that we want to make sure we maximize the revenue stream.
Great, thank you. What questions did people have on the last couple of projects? Anyone? Amazing. We go backwards real quick to page 3-18. This is the site and athletic fields improvement, and I know it's the public schools department, but I just wanted to relate it in with our prior discussion. Under the narrative here, you indicate that a long-term athletic field and site infrastructure improvements program is needed. And I think that's a great idea, personally. I think we do need to take a look at what athletic fields we have, what courts we have, tennis and basketball, pickleball, and whatever else people play, and take a broader look at those, whether they serve the needs of the community, whether we need to make improvements on a larger scale. And I'm wondering if we want to think about getting that project started and sooner rather than later, so that we can make more informed decisions as we move over the next several years. Just looking for some feedback from, I guess, either you, Helen, or from the manager. Yeah.
I'd be happy to. So that, in fact, is what our capital improvement plan, the 12-year plan, is. We meet regularly with DPW, who oversees the grounds at schools and parks. And we develop that plan together based on a general idea of when we think things will need to happen, but then we tweak it based on what we're seeing in real time. So it may be that we want to reinvest in, for example, we may want to dovetail projects, right? So we might be able to get a better deal if we're doing 2 things at the same time instead of separating them by a couple of years. So if a contractor is mobilized to do something here, could that contractor also do it at a different location at the same time? So we are constantly in discussion and coordinating between the athletic director and myself, and between the staff that oversees the school grounds and the park fields.
Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll work closely with the superintendent and the assistant superintendent and develop, getting started on this long-term infrastructure program to take a longer view look at our athletic fields around town. So I'll have a conversation with Dr. Morrow and Ms. McKiernan this week, and we'll see where we are in terms of getting that program off the ground sooner versus later.
Yeah, thank you. And then also on this page, is this where we would see improvements to the Holland Conrad softball fields? I know that's been discussed at the board level.
I do have an update on that. So the fields are complete. Those fields have been renovated, and they do. I was texting with our with Justin Andrews from Public Works. He said they will be ready for spring. They're not sure about the dugouts at the softball fields, but they did renovate both the varsity and the junior varsity at Hall last year, and Conard was done in the spring of 2020. I do believe that there are additional improvements that are being sought there, but that was what his report was for the fields themselves.
Yeah, I was thinking, thank you for that. I was thinking about the additional improvements, and I know a few things that have been discussed have been that there was private fundraising done for a scoreboard at Hall that then sat and was not installed because the electricity didn't get run. So I'm wondering if that has happened yet. There was also a discussion of having fences in the outfield so that we can try to prevent the ball from ending up somewhere else. And another point was for dugouts. So those are the improvements that I'm referencing.
Yeah, I apologize, but that is something that Public Works will have to answer.
Great, thank you. If we can just get that answer back, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
We can.
Thank you. Other questions from council members? Wow, I think we made it. Did we make it all the way through?
We did. I was just going to mention year 2 is also kind of a major thing component of our capital budget. And there I just wanted to mention we have 2 very large ticket items that come as no surprise. The Eisenhower pool and bathhouse replacement came in over budget, and we pulled the project, and we intend to go back out to bid. But we did want to put a placeholder amount there to fully fund that project. And the second is a large scale irrigation replacement at Rockledge. This hasn't been done since I'm going to say 1981 was when it was installed. So it had a 20-year lifespan at that time. And we're obviously well past that. And we do have a lot of leaks and inefficiencies that go on there. And so we plan to replace that irrigation system again, and it will be able to be remotely accessed so that you can turn it off and turn it on. It saves costs a lot and will help. Basically, you can't have this course going forward unless we do this project. So it is a very important in reinvestment in that facility. It hasn't been done since 1981. That's it.
Thank you. Any questions from council members? Or additional comments? So, Mr. Manager, do you have any closing comments for this meeting? And can I ask you at least to give us some next steps?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate everyone's time tonight. I know that was a lot. We do have a couple of items that we will take back in-house and discuss internally. We'll talk a little bit and may want to circle back with you to talk offline a little bit more about Rockledge and potentially withdrawing that from our CIP plan and maybe look at the possibility of working with a consultant to take a more, holistic view of the golf course. So we'll circle back with you on that. And then there are a couple of other items that we'll get back to you on as well. And we'll do that over the next few days. And then from here, our next budget workshop takes place on Wednesday morning with our Community Planning and Economic Development Committee. That begins at 8 o'clock. Our chair, Councilor McGinnis, will oversee her first budget workshop for the CPED committee. And look forward to seeing as many of you as can join us on Wednesday morning at 8.
Thank you. And I have neglected, but I'm so sorry. I neglected to thank you, Helen, and your team for pulling this all together, and Peter and your team for pulling this all together. And of course to you, Mr. Manager. So I hope you all take my questions and the questions of the other counselors in the spirit in which they're intended, which is just trying to learn as much as we can about the decisions that are being, or the spending that's being proposed, the revenue that is being projected, and do the best that we can to provide a good quality of life for our residents, and also understanding all of the implications that come with improvements and spending as well. So thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for sticking it out for over 2 hours for this meeting, but I'm really grateful to all of you for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us, and for all your hard work. So without any objection, I will call for the meeting to adjourn at 8:14 p.m. Thank you so much, everybody.